Yo, it's Jared, and welcome to this video. This is round 5. This is my round 5 game from the Doeberl Cup 2017 Major Tournament. In this game I have the black pieces against Julius Anuari, and his rating is 1918, and he is the highest rated player in my section. So this was going to be a good game. I was happy to be paired with a really good player. So here we go, this is round 5, and my opponent kicked off with e4. I played e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. So he's played the Scotch, and I captured on d4, knight d4, and against this opening I have my own system. Well, it isn't my own system, but it's a system that isn't played too often, bishop to b4 check. More popular in this position are the moves bishop to c5 and knight to f6. These are the two moves that you see most often. But bishop to b4 check is actually a really nice move. The idea is after c3, which was played, black just plays the move bishop back to c5. And now you may ask, well, why did black play this check on b4? Why wouldn't you just go to c5 in one move? Because if you look at this position, after the move bishop to c5, which is one of the main moves, it doesn't really make sense for white to play the move pawn to c3, right? There is no reason to play this move, so why would white play it? But black spends the tempo and says to white, okay, if you play pawn to c3, which is the main move, and I drop back to c5, black tries to make the argument that the pawn on c3 is actually misplaced, and white would rather have the knight on c3 and not the pawn. I've had players mention to me that this check is not good because in the main line, one of the main lines with bishop to c5, white ends up playing the pawn to c3 regardless. But white actually only plays this pawn to c3 once black plays queen to f6 in this line, because black has now got lots of pressure on the knight on d4, and you don't want to move the knight because then I can take on e3 and your pawns are weakened. So black is actually forcing white to play this move, pawn to c3. So white doesn't want to play c3. White plays it in this line because he's forced to play it. So this bishop to b4 check and c3 is kind of interesting. If you play the move knight to c3, this is actually not so good. Black has multiple options here. Black can play the move knight to f6 and transpose back into a Scotch 4 knights variation with this line and bishop to d3 so that this pawn's protected. But black can also play the move queen e7. Now this looks a bit weird, but this takes advantage of this move order. Since black hasn't played the move knight to f6, black has this option of playing queen to e7. And this is actually a really good move. We attack the pawn on e4, and basically black wins this pawn, as white can't play bishop to d3 so that this pawn's protected because the knight hangs. And white certainly doesn't want to play a move like pawn to f3 to just weaken his kingside, because then black will play d5, and black is better. You can take a look at this line if you want. Black basically wins a pawn. Black will lag behind with his piece development for a while, but black is a pawn up, so you can take a look at this line. My opponent played bishop to e3. Now this has the idea of playing knight takes c6, which would win a piece for white because the knight on c6 would be attacking my queen on d8. So what black plays bishop to b6. Bishop c4, and now the move knight to f6 I played. Now this line offers up a pawn to white if white wants to take it. Knight takes c6, this was played, bc6 and e5. This is the most testing line of play. I've had this position after knight c6 many times, and this is actually the first time that I've had someone play this testing line against me. Mostly in this position, players play moves like knight to d2 so that the pawn's protected, and I've even had one player play queen to c2. But knight takes c6 is the best move. B takes c6, e5, and knight to d5. Now, in this position, my opponent played bishop takes b6. It's the line is played bishop takes d5, c takes, and queen takes, which of course hits the rook on a8, so black plays rook b8. And now this position is okay for white, but white needs to be very, very careful. Moves like bishop takes b6, rook takes b6 is obviously okay for black. Black attacks the pawn on b2 and has ideas of playing rook g6 and maybe queen h4. Black gets lots and lots of activity for this pawn, also bishop to b7. White's a pawn up, but it's clear to see that white could become the victim of a powerful attack. So white did not take on d5, but instead chose to take on b6, which is fine. A b6, and he castled. It was also possible, rather than castling, to now capture this pawn. This is a bit different though. Queen takes, and now the move rook to a5 to attack the queen. Queen e4 and just castles. Castles, rook e8, and black has got both rooks attacking the d4 pawn, f4 and d6 to put some more pressure on the pawn. And already in this position, the engine wants to play some pretty wild moves like b4, which, I don't know, if you have to play this move, it seems like you don't have a great position to me. I mean, b4 just looks very weakening. But as mentioned, castles was played, and now I played a move that during the game I thought was quite interesting. I played queen to g5, but this wasn't a great move because I overlooked the line that my opponent played now. He just took the knight and played f4 to protect his e5 pawn. And once I moved the queen, he took the pawn on d5. Instead of queen to g5, it was better to simply castle, just continuing to offer up this pawn on d5. If now white captures on d5, rook a5, bishop b7, and queen to a8 is a nice move, attacking g2 and attacking a2, and black will get a pawn back. Also, there is the move knight to f4, which is interesting. Black wants to play queen to g5. Say a move like knight d2, castles, and queen g4 to keep black from playing queen to g5. And attacking the knight on f4, black just drops back to e6. And after f4, intending to play f5, black hits with d5. And in this position, white has to capture on d6, and black is perfectly fine here. If white is not capturing on d6, and for example plays a move like bishop b3 or bishop d3, then white gets hit with knight c5, opening up an attack on the queen on g4 and attacking the bishop. Or if you move the bishop to e2, then black plays knight d4, opening up an attack on the queen and attacking the bishop, and black will be better. So that line was interesting. But as mentioned, I played queen to g5, which wasn't a great move due to the line that he played, bishop d5 and f4. I played queen f5, and he captured my pawn. Now I played rook a7. Turns out that this move was leading me into some big trouble. My idea with rook a7 was to play the move bishop to b7 really quickly. I felt I need to get the bishop onto b7, or I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just a pawn down for not much. But rook a7 wasn't a good move. Rook a5 was a much better move, attacking the queen, and after queen d4, I can play bishop to b7. Something like knight d2, rook d5, queen f2, and just castles. And black has pressure. Black's a pawn down long term, yes, but black has good pieces, and this bishop on b7 offers black some chances. But I played rook a7, and he played knight to d2, which is good. Bishop b7, as planned. Queen d4. Castles, knight c4. All this is fine. I played rook fa8. Possibly not the best move. The computer points out f6, which I also looked at, but I wasn't particularly convinced by. Takes, knight e3, queen e6, f5, and queen c6. Something similar to this happened in the game, but maybe this is better. I have the rook on the f-file attacking the f5 pawn. It's possible, maybe rook d6. Looks a bit weird, but could be an idea. But rook f to a8 was played, and knight to e3. Queen e6, f5, and queen c6. All of this is okay. And now, in this moment, my opponent has a nice edge, but he played a move, he played queen to h4, and this move was not good. He clearly wants to attack me with moves like, f6, and if I play g6, then he comes in with queen h6 and mates me. This was his idea. But this plan is just not fast enough after my next move, queen c5, and I'm attacking the knight on e3 and the pawn on e5, which forced him to come back to d4. Instead of queen to h4, white had the option of c4, intending to play the move knight to d5 and to make my bishop on b7 and my queen on c6 look dumb. So black would need to play a move like queen to e4, and after the trade, rook d1, rook e8, some line like this seems rather logical. And white remains a pawn up and has some chances to win, but it's not over yet, so black can hope to fight on. But as mentioned, queen h4 was played, and the problem with this is the move that I played, queen to c5, which attacks both the knight on e3 and the pawn on e5, which forces white to come back to d4. And now in this position, I played queen takes d4 because I was happy to get the queens off. It turns out a better move was simply to take on a2 and let him take on c5. And a variation like this, I can play bishop to c6 and my pawn on d7 is protected. And a line like this. Black remains a pawn down, but the rook on b2 offers black some good chances to hold. But I traded queens first, c takes, and then took the pawn. Trades, and now in this position my opponent played a very weird move. He played rook to b1. I was expecting the move rook to c1, which looks far more normal, simply to attack my c-pawn. I would have to play c5 and to offer up the pawn like this. And after rook to c7, attacking my d7 pawn, I can play f6, e6 trades. And a line like this is what the engine gives. I probably wouldn't have found these moves, but king to e1 is what the engine wants to play. But if you play the more normal looking move, king to g3 to go up the board, it's actually not that great. Black just plays rook b3 with this pin. And if the king continues to go up the board, rook b4 check. And king to g3 is what the engine wants to do, and you make a draw. But of course, if you go up the board, what happens if you go up the board? Bishop e4 check is actually good for black, which forces the black king to come back in the line of the rook, and then you can play this nice move, bishop d5 check, and win the pawn on e6. So if white wants to try to win, he needs to move the king up the board, but this is not actually helping him after rook b3, and white's forced to make a perpetual of some sort. But rook b1 was played. I played bishop e4, Rook c1 now, c6, d5, and I played c5, which wasn't a great move. King f8 is much better, just trying to bring the king into the game, and a line might continue f6, b5, takes, knight d1 in order to get in knight to c3, so rook a8, knight c3, bishop g6, knight e2, opening up the attack on the c6 pawn, so rook e8 to counter, rook c6, taking on f6 is a nice move because of the pin down towards the knight on the e-file, so rook takes, and this should be about equal. But I played c5, and after c5 he played a move that I thought wasn't working, and checking with the engine afterwards I was right. He played e6. Much better was b4, and white has very good chances to win. Obviously I can't take this pawn because I get mated on the back rank. And if I can't take the pawn, then the c5 pawn's just hanging, and I'm not quite sure what I should play here. I don't really have a good move. But he played e6 instead, and I captured 2 times, and he played d6. This was his point. He wants to get the passed pawn on d6. King f7, knight c4, and now I played a very bad move. I played b5. What I didn't appreciate in this moment was that if he takes on b6 with the knight, then his b2 pawn is hanging. So I can actually just play a move like king e8 with the intention of at some point playing king d7 or even just king d8, just so that this pawn won't queen. So a line like knight b6, just rook takes b2, and black is winning here. The knight on b6 is hanging and the pawn on g2 is hanging. So this is not playable for white. But this bad move b5 was played, and after knight e5, black's in trouble. King f6, and he played rook takes c5, which wasn't the best move. The best move appears to be knight to d7 check. King f7 and taking with the knight. Bishop d5 and rook f1. And this is awkward for black now. The best move is king to g8, which is, if I had this position, I probably wouldn't play king g8 because it just looks wrong. But it's really the best move. If I play a move like king to g6, then just d7, and I think I can just resign. This pawn is just way too quick. So king g8 is forced, and now knight to d7 with the idea of mating on f8. So rook a8, knight e5 with ideas of pushing d7, rook d8 and d7, and white's next plan, as I've painted, is rook to f7, rook e7, rook e8, and white wins. And there's actually not much that black can do about this plan. But he played rook takes c5, rook takes b2, knight d7 check, king g6, and now he played a bad move again. He played knight b6. Better was g4, just to save the g pawn. And this variation, which the engine gives, is rather interesting. Rook d1 to get behind the pawn. It's actually important to give the check on b1 first. If I play rook to d2, this loses to a very nice line, knight e5 check, king f6, and g5 check. The black king is forced to capture, and now white simply plays knight to f3 check, or can play knight to c4 check and win my rook. So rook b1 check first must be played, king f2 and rook d1. Knight e5, king f6, king e3. And the problem here for black is he's attacking my bishop with his king. And the problem is if I save my bishop with a move like bishop d5, he plays g5 check, which is a nice move. If I take either the knight or the pawn, then he just plays d7 and the pawn queens. So this means I can't save my bishop. So pawn to g4 would have won white the game. Knight to b6 though is actually a draw if I play the right line. I played the first move, rook takes g2 check, king f1, rook d2, d7. Now in this position, black can draw, but the way to draw is not easy. I had no time left on my clock and I played a bad move which loses. I played king to f7, which just lets the pawn queen after rook c1. But if you'd like to pause the video, try to find the only move and the only plan which draws for black. Okay, the only move that draws for black is b4. There's nothing that black can do about the d-pawn. If white wants to queen the d-pawn, then he will. So black needs some counterplay with his own pawn. And it turns out black does have some chances to win if white is not playing carefully. If white, for example, tries to queen his pawn with the move rook c8, black is winning now after b3. This pawn is just too quick. d8 queen, takes, b2, and black wins. So after b4, the best move is king to e1. And now this line gets difficult. Rook d6 to attack the knight, which protects the pawn on d7. If you play the move rook to b5, then black plays bishop c6. And actually, black is better. Black may even be winning. So the move is knight c4. And this looks tricky. If you take the pawn, there's knight e5 check. But this is actually the way to draw. King h6, knight takes rook, and b3. White's only move is rook b5, and now bishop c6. This is very difficult to see when you have no time on your clock. Rook b3 and bishop takes knight, and black has two pawns and a bishop for a rook, and has very good chances to draw. I mean, I think this is just an easy draw. Just bishop c6, bishop d5, and just do nothing. But after d7, I blundered with king f7. I saw that rook to c8 wins, but I couldn't find any other move, so I just played king to f7, king e7, and I let him queen. I really didn't find a way to keep the pawn from queening. I knew that there had to be one, because I didn't think that this pawn to e6 move by him was good, but with no time on my clock, I couldn't find the right line. And I kept on making some moves. I wasn't particularly happy. I had worked my way back into this game and tossed it away with just one dumb move at the end. So I made some more moves just because I was annoyed and lost all of my pawns. And after rook to b6 here, I played bishop to d1. And the game ended like this. And I decided to toss in the towel here. But in this position, white actually has a mate in 2. And if you'd like to pause the video, see if you can find it. Okay, the mate in 2 is h3, intending rook f6 checkmate. And there's actually nothing that black can do about this. So that would have been a nicer way for him to end the game, but the way he played it, of course, is fine. So sadly, a loss in this game, but that's okay. I was happy to have a reasonably good game with the highest rated player in the field. So at this point in the tournament, after 5 rounds, I'm on 2.5, and I'm reasonably happy with that. So we have 2 rounds to go to the end of the tournament, and I'm hoping for maybe one more win would be nice. I think in this tournament, in the major, something like 3.5 out of 7 would be reasonable. So I was hoping for something like that by the end of the tournament. And yeah, so if I could get that, that would be great. Thanks for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed this game, and stay tuned for my coverage of round 6 from the Doeberl Cup 2017 tournament. Thanks a lot and see you in the next one.